Welcome to Decarbonizing Today, a deep dive into the Edmonton Metro region's role in addressing the global climate crisis. In this episode, we have Chris Rowell, the head of Net Zero for Tees Valley, and your Edmonton Global host, Brent Lakeman.
And as we get started, maybe Chris, if you could just talk a bit more about the Tees Valley cluster, the industrial cluster that you're focused on, and maybe we'll kind of eventually also talk about some of the similarities and differences with our region.
Absolutely, Brent. I think the Tees Valley is a region that's got a really strong history of industry, going back to the advent of steel making there in the mid 19th century, and then the development of the chemical industry over subsequent decades. So we've long relied on essentially being a part of the world that built quite a bit of the rest of the world. So you'll find Teesside steel in the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and in the Cabinet War Rooms in London, in all kinds of famous buildings, and the global price of steel used to be set in Middlesbrough. The centre of the UK's chemical industry, ICI, was in Teesside, as well as a number of other cluster sites. And over the years, the economy's changed, and our chemical industry now is very much one of branch plants, sort of operating well, efficiently in Teesside, but owned by foreign headquartered companies with decisions about their future being made elsewhere. And with the clustering effect is really great when you're adding to it. So when we add new firms to our industrial cluster, there are efficiencies from trading between things and between them and doing things at scale. Whereas if you lose a plant, then you lose those efficiencies, and over time it becomes less strong. So green technologies are a sort of an opportunity for an industrial rebirth in the Tees Valley. So, well, our chemical industry is still strong, but we lost steel making in 2015. We do still process some steel made elsewhere in the UK, but carbon capture alongside hydrogen and other green energy provide a sort of a singular opportunity for us to reinvent manufacturing in the Tees Valley, and it's on a scale that we haven't seen in decades.
So, and I was in the Tees Valley earlier this year on a mission, on a Canada-UK mission, and I guess I was really fascinated by the cluster approach that we've seen there. And maybe can you just give us a little bit of background on how this cluster really came to be? Obviously, the historical production there, but maybe more recently, recognizing the integration opportunities between industries in Tees.
Working together as a cluster is something it's in no way new to the Tees Valley. We've been collaborating across the cluster on for decades, since the dissolution of the sort of monolithic state-owned industries. The then smaller private industries did collaborate where necessary. And what we found when carbon capture was first mooted, and you'll know this isn't the first time it's been looked at in the UK, but I think this third time is going to be the successful one. We already had that basis of trust and collaboration that's allowed the Tees Valley to put itself at the forefront of CCUS in the UK. So when I say CCUS, it's carbon capture, utilization and storage, and there are opportunities, and as I've seen in Alberta as well, there are opportunities for captured carbon that don't involve sequestration, but do enhance the sort of environmental and industrial sustainability.
Okay. And you've been here now in Edmonton for a couple of days, I know, and you probably met some of the key players here, learning a bit about our industrial ecosystems. What would you say would be maybe some of the key similarities, or maybe the differences as well, between how we're looking at our industrial clusters and what we've seen in the UK, particularly with your own?
Of course, I'd say the scale is a bit different. The scale of energy production and actually dependence on energy is much greater here in Alberta, but the challenges are similar. So the challenges are, how do you take a skilled populace that is used to making energy or working in energy-intensive industries and prepare them for a low-carbon rest of the 21st century? So how do you keep people in jobs and in fact enhance those? So from what I've seen, there's industrial collaboration going on here. So you've got Edmonton Global is obviously sort of fronting up for the region in a big way. You've got the Alberta Industrial Heartland, which is just things somewhat analogous to the organisation I work in do, where it's fostering collaboration and it's coming up with a plan. So I've been lucky enough to sit down with their team members and see what they've got planned for their cluster, and we've been able to engage with the government of Alberta as well. So we've been briefed this morning on their plans for environmental regulation. But in doing that, they showed the 23 different CCUS hubs that are currently under consideration across the province. and it's, I mean, the scale is huge. Where in the UK, we are looking at the moment, we've got 4 CCUS hub projects signed off. The Tees Valley is part of one of those, and they're all using offshore storage, under either, in our case, under the North Sea, but there's also significant capacity under the Irish Sea as well, between the UK and the Irish mainland. So yeah, there's definitely similarities and differences in that sense, but ultimately all it comes down to is people and energy, and people need to be looked after, and the world needs energy.
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely, I think, some similarities there. I mean, maybe just from the perspective of carbon capture and storage in this conference, what are some things that you're hoping to learn from the Canadian experience?
Well, you guys have been doing carbon capture successfully for some years now. You've got carbon sequestration under Alberta in the millions of tons already, and because of that, we've visited the University of Alberta, and we've heard from their geologists, as well as some people doing work on seismology in the private sector. They've already got a pretty good idea of what happens during when you're capturing carbon and sequestering it in the saline aquifers. Now, in the UK, we're looking at doing that on the seabed, but ultimately the challenges remain. There are additional challenges to doing it under the sea, as there are challenges you'll have doing it on land that we're not going to have. But it is very similar. The questions of ensuring the carbon stays there, of if there are any issues keeping it there, verifying whose carbon it is, how much of it, and where's it gone. That sort of thing. But it's
And I mean, I guess potentially some opportunities for companies that are working on CCS here to be involved in some of the projects in the UK as well.
Absolutely. I think we've got, so you've had a really massive investment from Linde. Mm-hmm. So they are through Linde and BOC, one of our industrials. They're one of the 3 carbon capture projects already selected in the Tees Valley for government support. And BOC already in Teesside produced 50% of the UK's commercially available hydrogen. And that sounds like a lot, but in fact, the hydrogen production we're going to see off the back of CCS and off the back of green hydrogen will dwarf it. It's fascinating to see the sort of they're doing similar things in both places, but they're going to retrofit carbon. Well, they're going to retrofit CCUS to a process they're already splitting out the carbon in. And I think another similarity is actually a lot of the underpinning technologies. But yeah, you guys have been doing subsurface work here for decades, and your industrial processes have involved many of the things required for carbon capture. We're in exactly the same position in the UK. We've been working on the North Sea for longer than I've been alive, and we've been splitting hydrogen and carbon, and we've been piping hydrogen around our industrial cluster for years. So what we're doing is, while it's new and the application is new, there are elements of it that actually there's loads of existing experience in.
Right. And maybe one of the things I picked up when I was in the UK was, the focus on domestic supply chains, the focus on the workforce itself, again, coming from a industrial cluster that has a lot of history in Tees Valley, Teesside. And, now we're talking about carbon capture and storage. Few questions in here, but any thoughts, I guess, first on maybe the public attitudes for CCUS? I know it's offshore in the UK. We've got an onshore experience here, but again, maybe some learnings about how we're both approaching our own communities and seeing, what would be the public concerns, if any, around CCUS, and how we can learn from each other's projects.
I think there's 2 levels of engagement with the public. You've got the political level. So we've got a mayor in the Tees Valley, Ben Houchin, who's he's made CCUS, hydrogen, and related technologies part of his agenda. And he communicates with the public on it, and he communicates with them on the topic of jobs and prosperity, and providing the skills to get those jobs. And our organisation has a set of devolved powers from the UK government. We don't do provinces like you guys do here. It's much more centralised. This is one of our first steps within England of devolution. We've got powers and budgets that help that help grow our economy. And one of the things we're doing is using our devolved skills funding to support big green inward investors. So we're going to need welders for offshore projects. We're going to need people who may have worked in the chemical industry before to reskill on hydrogen and CCUS. But also, and I think that the really important part is people want their own prosperity, but they're much more interested in prosperity for the next generations. So we've got BP have funded what we call the BP Scholars. So they're in technical skilled education at one of our colleges. They've funded that. They're working on a sort of a live carbon capture rig, and there are plans to do similar hydrogen things in the Tees Valley. They're planning for the jobs of the future today.
Yeah, I think that's very similar here. Younger people are looking for jobs in clean energy, and sometimes not always realizing that some of those jobs are actually right here. We've got this historical experience that is kind of not that, it's not a big stretch to pivot into clean energy. If you're looking at CO2 storage, those similar skill sets you maybe developed in oil and gas or other industrial processes.
As an island nation, the offshore energy has been a big thing for the UK. So you may see a young person entering the market, labour market, working on CCUS pipeline, where their father worked in offshore wind and their grandfather worked on an oil and gas rig. It's all part of the energy mix, and the skills are actually kind of similar. It's we've in the UK we've transitioned in a large way from offshore oil and gas. We still do offshore oil and gas, but in a smaller way. Our energy transition has taken the same people that were working on the oil rigs have been building the wind farms.
Yeah.
And you'll see that transition continue, and I think we'll see a transition in the chemical cluster as well to people working on hydrogen, but also sustainable fuels. I often say this: if you've got CCUS, you've got hydrogen, and you've got clean energy, you've got all the ingredients for the fuels of the future. And I see that in Tees Valley, and I see it here in Alberta as well.
Yeah, no, I think we're highly aligned there, and we're talking about the opportunities, but I guess also, what remaining challenges are you dealing with that you think are really critical from the UK perspective in Tees Valley, and maybe is there any learnings even on how we address those challenges by working together?
Of course. So, technology needs to be improved all the time. The projects completed in the next few years will probably be completely outclassed by technology deployed in 5-10 years after that. So, we've supported we've worked with the UK's innovation agency, Innovate UK, to support emerging technologies that will improve hydrogen and CCUS. But for us, because of the sort of 50% blue hydrogen in the planned mix in Tees Valley, actually for us it's two sides of the same coin.
Again, there's huge opportunities. We've been several times now to the UK for these joint missions. So I think it's just the beginning of more collaboration here. And I guess I look forward to continuing the discussion, how we can learn from the cluster approach of the UK. And again, we have maybe some similarities. Some of our projects are maybe more greenfield here in the Edmonton region, as opposed to it's the historic brownfield projects. But I think we have some shared learnings around that. And I think that's maybe the thing that people haven't always picked up. There's been so much collaboration on technology development through our organizations like Alberta Innovates, Emission Reduction Alberta, and really allows us to start working together on projects that are in common. I want to thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to be here and learn about your approach, and we'll continue to connect on our industrial clusters.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode of Decarbonizing Today to continue exploring how decarbonizing tomorrow starts today in the Edmonton metro region.